faithfully sharing value and interpreting great books from around the world. Hello, this is Sally's Book Talk. Today I'm introducing the book Footbinding, subtitled The Rise and Fall of the Golden Lotus Cult. Footbinding mainly involved tightly wrapping young girls' feet with cloth to deform and shrink them. Today, this decaying custom severely harmed women's physical and mental health, yet it persisted in Chinese history for nearly 1,000 years. Not only did countless men find it beautiful, but generations of women also took pride in having 3-inch golden lotuses. So, how did footbinding become popular and how did it decline? This is precisely footbinding, the theme this book explores. The author is renowned sinologist Dorothy Ko. She holds a PhD in East Asian history from Stanford University and is currently a professor at Barnard College, Columbia University in New York City. She argues that since the May 4th movement, research on footbinding has portrayed women as innate victims, criticizing the custom while ignoring women's own agency and subjectivity. Whoa, but through this book, she aims to correct this, enabling us to view footbinding from a more diverse perspective, recognizing that each footbound woman lived in a complex world where motivations, choices, hardships, and costs constantly shifted. To do this, she not only handles textual materials like traditional historians, but also focuses on studying objects like shoes, socks, and binding cloths to understand the bodily sensations of footbound women and hear their inner whispers. So, you know, next I'll break down the book's main content into two parts for you. First, let's briefly review how footbinding evolved from a dance aesthetic to a widespread social custom. Second, we'll examine how footbinding was gradually stripped of its cultural honor and dignity in modern times. All right, let's start by exploring the origin and development of footbinding. Currently, the earliest record of the term footbinding comes from the Song Dynasty scholar Zhang Bengji. In his work, Muchuang Manlu, completed around 1148, he wrote, "When did women's footbinding begin? Historical records don't mention it. Thus, it's highly likely that footbinding had just started gaining popularity during Zhang Bengji's time." His observation is often cited by later scholars to emphasize that footbinding's popularity didn't predate the 12th century. Of course, footbinding underwent a lengthy process from its emergence to widespread popularity. Scholars throughout history have researched footbinding's origins, and Gao Yani systematically compiled these findings in the book. Let's briefly introduce several influential theories. Many folk legends attribute footbinding's origin to Daji, a fox spirit sent by goddess Nua to bewitch King Zhao of Shang. Since her feet weren't fully human, she wrapped them tightly to avoid detection. Ah! As Daji gained favor, other palace women began imitating her. Naturally, this completely unsubstantiated legend isn't accepted by scholars across dynasties. Others suggest footbinding may have originated with consort Pan, favored by Emperor Xiao Baozhuan of southern Qi. Historical records note consort Pan had tiny feet. To admire her graceful gait, the emperor had her walk on golden lotus designs, calling it "each step births a lotus." As footbinding customs spread, golden lotus gradually became synonymous with women's small feet. However, since historical texts never explicitly mention footbinding, this theory faces scholarly rejection. Some scholars propose Yang Guifei of Tang Dynasty as origin, she of cloud-like robes, flower-like face, and spring breeze caressing dew-laden railings fame. After Yang Guifei hanged herself at Mawei Slope, Emperor Xuanzang reportedly wrote Ode to Silk Socks mourning her. It described slender and rounded, fitting narrow grooves, narrow and arched like crescent moons held in palms. But scholars note this poem was likely forged posthumously, discrediting the theory. Another theory points to dancer Yao Nian, favored by Li Yu, last ruler of southern Tang. Yuan dynasty records describe Li Yu building a 6-foot golden lotus platform. She bind her feet crescent-shaped, don plain socks, and dance gracefully upon the golden lotus. Reportedly, this enhanced her dance, creating ethereal spins reminiscent of modern ballet. Notice how these origin theories, while differing, all connect to court dance aesthetics. Though evidence remains inconclusive, author Gao Yanyi concludes foot binding likely emerged in late Tang 5 Dynasty's courts, 10th century, for two reasons. First, documents show China's early aesthetic preference for small feet, like Sima Qian's Western Han records describing Zhao and Zhang women swaying long sleeves, treading pointed shoes. Here, treading sharp shoes refers to dancers who wear pointed dance shoes to make their feet appear as small as possible. During the Tang Dynasty, Dumu praised women's delicate feet with lines like, measured with a fine ruler, reduced by a quarter, slender jade shoots wrapped in dark clouds. However, in the vast sea of documents from the 10th century, there's almost no clear record of foot binding. Secondly, from a material perspective, around the 10th century, Chinese people adopted the habit of sitting on chairs. Gao Yanyi argues that the invention and spread of chairs likely facilitated the transition of small feet from a unique aesthetic preference to a concrete bodily practice. Because previously, women often knelt in daily life, requiring their feet to bear their upper body weight. Thus, foot binding was unlikely. After chairs became common, sitting with feet suspended both freed women's feet and made it easier to display small feet, making foot binding possible. All right, now we understand. Foot binding likely originated in the courts around the 10th century due to rulers' unique aesthetic preferences. So, how did it transform from a fashion popular among the upper class to a widespread custom? Next, let's follow the river of time to explore this. During the Northern Song dynasty, the trend of foot binding was emerging, primarily popular among dancers entertaining men, not ordinary women. For example, Sushi wrote a poem, Pusaman, Ode to Feet. Apply fragrance without sparing, lotus-bearing steps. Long sorrow silk socks tread waves away. Only see the dance whirls like wind, leaving no trace. Stealthily wear palace-style shoes. Standing together feet weary. Delicate beauty hard to describe, must view from the palm. Praising the dancer's slender feet as exquisitely beautiful, needing to be held in the palm and admired. Thus, in the Northern Song, dancers bound their feet, and Sushi mentioned in the poem that the woman stealthily wore palace-style shoes, indicating that foot binding likely started among palace dancers before being imitated by commoners. By the Southern Song dynasty, foot binding began to spread further, becoming a symbol of female beauty. This spread was partly due to emulation, as upper-class aesthetics gradually permeated downwards. On the other hand, it was closely related to the rise of Neo-Confucianism at that time. During the Southern Song, Neo-Confucian scholars, like Jushi, believed that women's activities should be strictly confined. They should not appear in public at will, staying within the home, and foot binding severely impaired women's mobility, perfectly aligning with this moral demand for women, promoting the spread of foot binding. Of course, foot binding in the Song dynasty wasn't as extreme as in the Ming and Qing periods. It didn't involve brutally breaking women's toes. Instead, it just used cloth to tightly bind their feet, restricting natural growth to make them appear more slender and petite. This is well supported by archaeological findings. For example, in Fuzhou, during the Southern Song, 6 pairs of bow shoes were unearthed from Huan Sheng's tomb, each about 14 centimeters long. Today, adult women wear size 35 shoes, with feet around 22 centimeters long. The tomb occupant, Huang Sheng, died at 17, and when discovered, each foot was still wrapped in binding cloth. Thus, during the Southern Song period Huang Sheng lived in, although foot binding was widespread, there wasn't excessive pursuit of extremely small feet. In this era, foot binding was less about endurance and hardship, and more about aristocratic elegance and refinement. By the Ming and Qing dynasties, the practice of foot binding among women deepened. Qian Yang, a Qing dynasty scholar, lamented in his writings that the practice of foot binding wasn't recorded in classical texts, and certainly not praised. Yet, in his time, it had become a widespread custom. Every family bound feet. If a woman's feet weren't small, she wasn't considered a proper person or woman. Clearly, by the Ming and Qing periods, foot binding had become a universal custom, the most prominent symbol of femininity. Of course, it's important to note that even at the height of foot binding in the Ming and Qing, not all women practiced it. For instance, Qing poet Zhao Yi wrote in his notes that while foot binding was common nationwide, in Guangdong and Guangxi provinces, urban residents imitated it, but rural folk did not, as lower-class women needed to walk and work, well, making foot binding impractical. Over time, foot binding not only expanded to more women but also intensified in a trend towards smaller and smaller feet. The 3-inch golden lotus became a real pursuit for many women. For example, a pair of imperial consorts' embroidered shoes, excavated from Emperor Wanli's tomb in the Ming Dynasty, measured only 12 centimeters, serving as prime physical evidence of foot binding size during that era. Moreover, the excessive pursuit of tiny feet is reflected in various literati writings. For instance, Li Yu, a renowned scholar of the late Ming and early Qing, recorded such a story in his Casual Expressions of Idle Feelings. Ironic, darkly humorous, a wealthy man from Yixing once bought a beautiful woman for 1,000 gold pieces, but her feet were bound so small she couldn't walk. She had to be carried everywhere, earning her the nickname Miss Bao, a pun on to hold. Behind the ever-shrinking size of bound feet lay endless suffering for countless women. An old folk saying captures it best. A pair of small feet costs a vat of tears. To achieve small feet, you must start young. During Ming and Qing, affluent families typically began binding girls' feet at 4 or 5 years old, while foot bones were still pliable any later, and feet wouldn't bind small enough. Mothers usually performed the binding, first using local secret remedies, herbal concoctions to soak the feet, making bones as soft as possible, then violently bending the 4 smaller toes toward the sole, applying alum as antiseptic,
followed by tightly wrapping the feet with binding cloth, layer upon layer.
After 3 to 5 days, the mother would unwrap, clean, and rewrap even tighter, repeated until feet deformed permanently. Many girls became too pained to walk, so mothers had to reteach them how to move. After binding, women walked with entire body weight on deformed heels and big toes. To balance, they tilted pelvises forward and swayed waists, a gait male literati romantically called lotus steps. Throughout this process, women endured physical and psychological devastation. Even after achieving success, lifelong pain and complications persisted. Hearing this, you might wonder, why did generations of women embrace such agony until it became nationwide custom? First, the profound influence of men's distorted aesthetic standards. Initially, men's preference for small feet was purely aesthetic. But over time, men realized small feet restricted movement, preserved chastity, and enhanced sensuality. These combined factors intensified men's obsession with bound-foot women. When the king of Chu favored slim waists, palace women starved. Ancient China's patriarchal society meant women depended entirely on men for survival. Once men collectively embraced this distorted ideal, women couldn't escape it. They had to comply, even at the cost of breaking bones. Second, since foot binding began among elites, it became a status symbol distinguishing social classes. By the Ming and Qing dynasties, foot binding for women was like the imperial examinations for men, a narrow bridge for climbing the social ladder. This opportunity for upward mobility gradually became universal, evolving into a standard for marriage prospects. Small feet meant better matches, favor, even class transcendence, making generations of women eagerly conform to male desires. Many modern critics imagine that if historical Chinese women had choice, they wouldn't have bound feet. Gao Yanyi considers this clearly mistaken. In reality, from the 16th century, Chinese women had no alternative. Families bound feet whenever economically possible. Even less affluent families tended to follow suit because to contemporary women, foot binding wasn't a burden but a privilege. All right, we've covered foot binding's historical evolution. Next, we'll examine how foot binding peaked, then declined during late Qing and Republican China. According to Gao Yanyi, its appearance wasn't linear, but a half-century tug-of-war. From roughly 1880s to 1930s, foot binding existed on three levels: ideological foot binding as cultural honor or legitimacy, customary as social practice, and individual personal experience. Their decline wasn't synchronized but staggered. Sometimes foot binding was ideologically outdated, yet mothers still bound daughters' feet. Other times legally criminalized, yet people stubbornly valued small feet. Thus, foot binding's end was prolonged and cyclical, oscillating among time, emotion, and fashion. Now, let's address each level separately. Foot binding's demise began ideologically. First, how anti-foot binding voices grew from historical whispers to era-defining cries. Actually, opposition to foot binding wasn't new. It existed since antiquity. For example, the classic of filial piety opens: "Our bodies, every hair and skin, are received from parents. We dare not injure them. This is filial piety's foundation." Foot binding violated this. Oh, so the girls in the family of Northern Song scholar Chang Yi didn't bind feet or pierce ears. This Cheng family tradition persisted until the early Yuan dynasty. Southern Song scholar Che Rushui also strongly opposed foot binding. He criticized women's foot binding. Who knows when it began? Innocent 4 or 5-year-olds endure boundless pain for tiny feet of unknown purpose. King scholar Qian Yang went further, calling foot binding morally corrupt, impairing women's mobility and labor capacity, even weakening national strength, urging the Qing government to ban it administratively. Note that although anti-foot binding voices appeared throughout dynasties, they never became mainstream. In mainstream narratives of that era, foot binding represented civilization and beauty. This began changing only after the Opium War. As China connected with the world and Western civilization's influence grew, Gao Yanyi notes the cultural decline of foot binding began with the coining of natural feet. Natural feet meant unbound natural feet. The term's earliest recorded use dates to 1875. During a Christian gathering in Xiamen, Reverend John McGowan led followers to establish the Xiamen Anti-Foot Binding Society, urging resistance. Why would a pastor do this? This traces back to 1860, after the Second Opium War, when he first came to China as a missionary. One day, he and his wife heard a girl's piercing screams next door and rushed to investigate. They found a neighbor binding her daughter's feet, explaining that, without it, the girl would be mocked as lower class when grown. This memory haunted Reverend McGowan forever. Determined to act, he held this conviction: persistent effort brings response. 15 years later, he finally established the Xiamen Anti-Foot Binding Society. Later, as Sino-foreign exchanges expanded, progressive Chinese intellectuals began observing the world, pondering deeply. Among reasons for China's backwardness and Western bullying, they identified foot binding as one cause. For example, Xu Ke, author of Classified Anthology of the Qing, explicitly opposed foot binding. But why did he hold this view? Not out of respect for women's wishes, but because they believed foot binding caused national backwardness. In Xu Ke's view, for China to strengthen itself and catch up with Western nations like Europe and America, it must eliminate foot binding. Women not binding feet would not only aid physical development, but, more importantly, wash away national shame. Today, blaming national backwardness on women's foot binding sounds absurd, but it was near consensus among late Qing intellectuals. For example, reformist leader Kang Yue established Guangdong's Anti-Foot Binding Society as early as 1883. During the 1898 Hundred Days Reform, Kang Yue submitted a memorial to Emperor Guangxu urging an imperial ban on foot binding because he believed foot binding made China uncompetitive internationally. Another reformist, Liang Chao, condemned foot binding. 20 million women are divided, none productive, ignorant, idle, unashamed, the root of China's weakness. Even the gentle Hu Shi once declared, "A woman with bound feet is the most useless of the useless." Gradually, these demands for women to abandon foot binding spread like wildfire. Nationwide anti-foot binding movements equated unbound feet with civilization, bound feet with barbarism, stripping foot binding of cultural honor. Under new intellectual elites' opposition, it faded bit by bit. Ideological progress inevitably drives social change. Next, we'll see how foot binding as social practice gradually disappeared. Influenced by public opinion, late Qing anti-foot binding groups focused on internal discipline. Members wouldn't bind daughters' feet nor marry bound-foot women, leading by example. They also emphasized publicity, distributing leaflets, newspaper ads, sponsoring essay contests, singing unbinding songs, and hosting foot-freeing rallies. Most notably, activists used photographs and X-rays to expose deformed bound feet, stripping away foot binding's aesthetic mystique. The publicity proved highly effective. Beyond activist groups, new style schools became anti-foot binding strongholds in late Qing. Many educated young women, influenced by new ideas, rejected foot binding and actively promoted change. In 1904, at a school in Wuxing, Zhejiang, a grand foot unbinding commemoration was held to honor Kai Aiwa, a female student who decided to unbind her feet after encountering anti-foot binding ideas. Of course, relying solely on grassroots efforts to quickly reverse foot binding customs showed slow results. Later, strong intervention by state administrative power greatly accelerated this process. In 1912, after the Republic of China's establishment, Sun Yat-sen issued decrees abolishing harmful customs to build a civilized society. These explicitly included nationwide foot-binding bans, though frequent government changes in early republic prevented effective implementation. However, some enlightened regional efforts actively promoted social reform within their jurisdictions. Naturally, their motivations were primarily economic. Like Shanxi's governing warlord, Yang Shishan believed Shanxi's population of 10 million, mostly women, were non-productive due to foot binding, weakening the province and perpetuating gender inequality. Thus, in 1917, he launched a massive anti-foot binding campaign across Shanxi. First, the government intensified propaganda, declaring foot binding as vile as opium smoking and gambling, plastering counties with prohibition notices. With low literacy, Yan mobilized specialized lecturers and 30,000 students from new style schools to spread anti-foot binding messages during holidays, leveraging hometown connections for change. Second, criminalizing foot binding. Yan understood that quickly reversing local foot binding required not just propaganda but administrative enforcement. He pushed through strict regulations, banning foot binding for girls under 15, fines for violations, prohibiting sales of specialized shoes, etc. These measures completely transformed foot binding into a criminal act. To ensure compliance, he made anti-foot binding success a key performance metric for county magistrates, while deploying specialized foot inspectors for door-to-door checks with immediate penalties. Well, of course, policies meet countermeasures. During Yan Shishan's administrative crackdown on foot binding, grassroots resistance took many forms. For example, evidence shows many Shanxi villages collectively paid fines to buy freedom for foot binding, avoiding government trouble. And, another case, hearing inspectors only checked unmarried girls, villagers rushed to marry off 13 to 14-year-old daughters. Despite resistance, Shanxi's campaign achieved results under administrative pressure. Data shows foot-bound women dropped from 17.8% in 1928 to 8.63% by 1934 in Shanxi. Later in May 1928, the Nanjing nationalist government issued a draft ban on women's foot binding. To enforce this, 1932 surveys made local foot binding data key official metrics, sparking nationwide anti-foot binding campaigns. Finally, shifting from macro to individual women themselves, their hesitations and choices facing anti-foot binding movements, the author recounts a bound foot woman showing an inspector a fried dough twist. Her say, "Untwist this and I'll unbind my feet." Unbinding wasn't simple. It faced invisible resistance from women's bodies. Foot binding was irreversible body modification. The formed bones couldn't recover, making unbound walking harder. Take Kai Aihoa, the student who publicly unbound her feet. Historical records reveal nothing about her later life. Yet Galya Ni prompts us, did Kai Aiwua's mother scold her at home? Would she rebind the feet tighter? Or would she defend her hard-won new body? Would she oscillate, unbinding and rebinding and struggle? You see, while the shift from foot binding to unbinding seems linear historically, focusing on individual lives reveals deep conflicts and hesitations. Regardless of personal choices, foot binding ultimately lost the tug of war against its abolition. The author argues this wasn't due to legal prohibition, but because it became outdated when stripped of cultural honor and dignity. When cultural elites abandoned it, foot binding essentially died. Even with countless women still binding daily, their feet were merely remnants of inertia. After the PRC's founding, bound foot women walking streets drew not admiration, but pity and curiosity. They'd become relics. All right, that concludes our discussion on foot binding history. Finally, sharing a special declaration from Dorothy Coe at the book's conclusion. She states this book isn't a comprehensive history, but her interpretations of intriguing texts and objects from the long foot binding era. She hopes to open a discussion space without definitive answers, a space where readers form their own views while continually examining them. Her goal isn't establishing certainties, but planting seeds of doubt in your mind. After hearing this, do you have new insights about foot binding or similar practices? Feel free to discuss in the comments. That concludes our interpretation of Dorothy Coe's foot binding. Reading notes are below the audio. Until next time.